From there, Jim, let's get one last question here on the show. This one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matt Miller. On a recent episode of Steve Austin's podcast, Mark Henry told the story about Ahmed Johnson lacerating Ron Simmons' kidney and forcing him to be out for 9 months. Mark said that when Ron came back, his very first match was, ironically, against Ahmed, where he allegedly took him down and almost immediately broke 3 ribs and pretty much took him out of the business from there. Just wondering if you could elaborate on the story or if you had any other great backstage Ron Simmons stories. He's always been talked about like a guy you would not want to mess with.
Well, I can't elaborate much on that because Mark pretty much told it. But yeah, Ron, and that's another thing about the 1989 Great American Bash. Guess who Ron Simmons was eliminated by in the Battle Royal?
Don't know.
Ranger Ross.
Ranger Ross, hey!
Yep. And as of how things changed in a short period of time.
How did that stick with you? How did that little...
Because I was so shocked. I just did this column a couple weeks ago, and I was so shocked at that when I watched it back after not having seen it for 30 years or whatever. But
he had the combat kick. He was cool.
Well, and he was dropped in a grenade out of an airplane. But anyway, but no, Ron Simmons, all the guys liked him from the start. They broke him in Florida in like 87. And you could tell he was going to be something. And he was kind of a prodigy, but he was a great athlete. And I mean, he was green for the first few years, but he grew into it quickly. And he was a man, and he was a stand-up guy. You didn't fuck him around. No, Ron Simmons was definitely, that whole APA thing was not a joke. You definitely did not want to be on the end of a Ron Simmons tongue lashing or fucking lesson in the ring.
It's been said he's the one guy the Steiners never messed with.
No. Well, and they respected him. It's not like they wanted to mess with him and were scared to. They didn't want to mess with him because they respected him and they liked him. But now I've seen him take, like, who was it? Ray Candy and Leroy Brown were the Commandos. Was it? I think it was, or was it
Zambui Express?
The Zambui. No, but then later on they were the Commandos. In 89 WCW.
No,
anyway,
Leroy Brown was dead by that point.
Well, then who was it? Ray Candy and...
I'm not sure.
Fuck, I can't remember. Another fat guy. Anyway, fucking Rick Steiner, for some reason, Ray Candy got on the wrong side of his nuts. And in every one of those battle royals, Rick Steiner would just take Ray Candy down in the middle of the ring and just tie him up and shit and just rub him around. And they also a couple times tried to do the same thing to Paul Lee, because the Steiners used to mess with Paul Lee bad. But anyway, no, Ron, that's another guy that Flair immediately wanted to use and to push and to make more of. So he goes from the summer of 89, he gets eliminated in a battle royal by Ranger Ross, to by the fall he's there teamed up with Butch Reed, and that's why they brought Butch in, because Flair wanted a veteran working alongside Ron to kind of teach him timing and tag team stuff. But at the same time, Butch had knee injuries by that point and was not the stud, as JR would say, in the ring that he once was. So Ron could take up for that and made him Doom. And and from that point on, Ron had everybody's respect. That's why Watts wanted to make him champion. He was to somewhat, he was trying to recreate JYD, but at the same time, Ron was over and capable of getting over, and he could carry the thing, and he looked like a champion. He acted like a champion. So the only time I was not a fan of Ron Simmons was when he was the first incarnation of Farouk. I was there, and I hear Ron Simmons is coming to the WWF, and I'm on the creative team, and I'm all right. And then I hear from Vince, and I see the sketches from creative services that he was like a fucking Roman gladiator, but his name was Farouk. and it looked like he ought to be in a fucking chariot.
Farouk Assad.
Farouk Assad, but his outfit looked like he just stepped off the fucking set of Ben-Hur. And I'm like, what? Once again, what the fuck? Why do we have to change these people? But then, thankfully, that didn't got over like a fart in church. But as Vince started, okay, well, when all else fails, let people be more of themselves, a la Steve Austin. That's one thing. They were being edgier at that point than they were the previous year. So, okay, could Farouk be in the Nation of Domination and to be a takeoff on the Nation of Islam? Okay, at least that's more realistic. So let's do that. And then that's why the group was put together with Ron, and then poor Godfather, Kama Mustafa, the martial arts UFC fighter, had gone nowhere because he really wasn't. He's a tough guy and he trained, but he wasn't like Dan Severn. So, and they didn't understand what the UFC was anyway in the WWF as illustrated by the Brawl for All. So that gave Godfather a place to go to become in a top group, and it gave D'Lo a break because once again, D'Lo, the same function he served in the Gangstas with New Jack and Mustafa, because he was a good worker, but he wasn't the focus guy. You could beat him if you needed to beat the team, and you still didn't take any heat off the team. But primarily, I think they put Rocky in there at first because they were like, well, what the fuck else do we do? Because people have booed him out of the building because we tried to force him down their throats. But that gave him it not only gave him resources of people to talk to that had more experience to ask, but at the same time, it started giving him people to play off of when he started just saying, fuck it, I'm just going to do my shit instead of what they tried to get me to do. So the whole Nation of Domination, it was theoretically supposed to be Farouk's group to get Farouk over, but by the time it was finished, it had gotten The Rock over, which was fine too. But no, Ron's always been one of my favorite people.
I'll tell you what, Jim, one last question since you opened this door, and this question did just come in. This was sent into CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from John Slowinski in Swanton, Ohio. Recently, I got a chance to see a full match on the NWA's YouTube channel featuring Hacksaw Butch Reed defending the North American title against the Junkyard Dog in Houston. After seeing this match, it got me wondering if Jim had any knowledge or background info on Butch Reed. I'm curious as to why Reed's name is not generally brought up in the discussions about classic wrestling, like how JYD and even Ernie Ladd is often brought up, with distinction from many. This is kind of, I'm trying to make sense of this as it's written. Jim, let's talk a little bit about Hacksaw Butch Reed and why isn't his name brought up a lot today when for a few years there he was really on fire?
He was one of the best. Well, it's because of timing and time passing by and the timing of which he was on top. Butch Reed was a great babyface in the Florida territory, especially. You could tell Eddie Graham loved him. In what was it, 80, 81, 82, that period there. 82. He was a great babyface in the Florida territory. He had worked in a couple places down south. He was a great athlete. And then Watts gets him in Mid-South. And of course, he's the kind of guy that Watts instantly wants to push because he had a football background, was a legitimate athlete, could cut a promo. Watts switches him heel there, and he was cutting great heel promos. And I mean, when I got there, everybody, Butch was one of the guys. Butch and Dog were really the two guys, and Duggan. There was a lot of great promos there now that I think about it. But all the boys wanted to sit down and hear what their promos were like. And then, fortunately, I got added to that mix. But, Butch would accuse JYD of selling wolf tickets. Selling wolf tickets is cutting a promo on a fucking match under false pretenses, right? You're crying wolf. Selling wolf tickets. This ain't going to be no big fight. Or talking out of both sides of your neck, like Ernie used to say. But his promos were great. He had that disdainful heel look, and he was having great matches. And they weren't smooth, scientific Ricky Steamboat classics he was having. He was having smash mouth fucking matches with Junkyard Dog and Hacksaw Duggan and the fucking, large guys of the Hercules Hernandezes and all those guys of the world in Mid-South Wrestling, which was fucking tough. And he was over. But then, what was it, by 85, that's when, didn't he leave there? Did he go somewhere before he went to Vince, or did he go straight to Vince?
I think at the end of 85, or maybe even the very beginning of 86, but I think the end of 85, because remember, he had the match with Flair on Mid-South TV in November of 85.
Yeah.
I believe he went to Kansas City and then he went to Vince, but I think there may have been some reasons why he went home to Kansas City.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is I think there was some personal issues that took him home to Kansas City because that's where he was from. And then he went to work for Vince, and by then he'd had some knee injuries. He'd worked a hard style, and also they slowed him down tremendously. And they're not the WWF in 1986 was not about to promote a ghetto street fight where this fucking guy was going to take his belt off and whip somebody and get juice on him and all that shit. So a lot of people remember they bleached him blonde like they did Shelton Benjamin years later. And a lot of people remember that. And, you know, and then unfortunately, except for a few WCW appearances in the early 90s, that was pretty much it on a mainstream basis for Butch. So it's just not enough people saw him and in the right place to remember him today, but he was fucking fantastic for a while there.
And I was a big fan of Doom. So let me ask you this. In the spring of 89, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons team up on some house shows. I don't remember if they did much TV, but definitely on house shows they were teaming up. And then they're not teaming up. And then the whole Robin Green turns into woman thing. And all of a sudden there's Ron Simmons and Butch Reed masked, but we were supposed to not know who they were, but it was pretty obvious who they were. Were you part of the booking committee when Doom was developed? And also, was that the original intention for Nancy, for the Robin Green character, to be the manager of Doom? Or was she originally going to do something else?
Hold on, cowboy. You're giving way too much continuity to 1989 WCW. Ric Flair had seen Ron Simmons and Butch Reed team up at random on some of those shows because they just put them down as a team when, you know, they were at probably George Scott when he was just booking. He just wrote names down. He didn't know who the guys were. He'd never seen us before. How's he know who these fucking guys are? Been there for 2 months. So he just wrote down a bunch of names. But Flair, I'm sure, had seen that. When Kevin Sullivan and Eddie Gilbert were part of the booking committee from, what was it, April until July, they obviously wanted to push the Steiners because they saw the talent there. And obviously, Kevin had a vested interest in having Nancy involved in something. Missy at one point had been with the Steiners there because Eddie had a vested interest in her. I'm not saying there's any nepotism going on here, but it was carried off well and people remember it. So if the performers are good, that's fine. But that was a summer booking committee idea that Robin Green, the fan of the Steiner fan, would turn into this fucking, you know, she would become the fallen angel, but called woman, right? But when Flair got the book, he saw, what the fuck are we wasting Ron Simmons and Butch Reed for in preliminaries? These guys need to be a top tag team. Since, I mean, he liked the name Doom, and I think he put the masks on them because they'd been featured in preliminaries. So let's not insult the people, even though you may know it's different, right? and to be quite honest, he said, and me and Kevin and both looked at him and said, my God, this is fucking fantastic. He said, can you imagine the visual, especially down south, of these two giant black men with this fucking the most beautiful, drop-dead, hot, sultry, gorgeous fucking white woman in the history of wrestling in these wild costumes? That looks like stars. Yes. And that'll get some heat. Yes. So that's where they went with that. And then, obviously, that segued into, on a more long-term basis, Teddy Long was with Doom. Because that fit even better, to be quite honest with you. And also because Teddy was doing good work at that point, and he had been with the Skyscrapers, who were the absolute worst fucking tag team that WCW ever signed because of Spivey's inability to do anything but try to work like Sid but not look like Sid. And they stunk every fucking match out they had. So, you know, everything worked well in the end, but there wasn't any long-term plans longer than 3 months for all of 1989. Well, until when Flair got the book at the end of July. From then till the end of the year, all the plans went through as scheduled. But everything else before that was three different people. It was Jimmy Crockett as a placeholder at the start of the year until they hired George Scott. George Scott for about 3 months, booking committee for about 2.5 or 3 months, and then Flair. Which is why a lot of everything sucked.
But during that first run of the booking committee, you had Eddie Gilbert and you had Kevin Sullivan. They both have wives that they want, obviously, to be involved. Missy was already somewhat involved on TV. They had already started building up the Robin Green character there for Rick Steiner. Was she originally, because Doom wasn't already an idea, was she originally intended to be with Kevin because he was still feuding with Rick Steiner? Or was
whatever, she was going to be opposite the Steiners, whatever that turned out to be. Now you're testing even my memory from 30 years ago. But yeah, it was originally going to be that she would turn on fucking the simple-minded Rick and become, and then, team with whoever the fuck that the Steiners were fucking with, or was fucking with the Steiners. But plans change, I hear.
And then one last thing, because I'm so fascinated with this period of time. How much
I'm glad you are.
Everyone is. How much heat was there between the two camps, the Gilbert camp and the Sullivan camp? Because even though they coexisted, and at one point they were both on the booking committee, they both did have a wife they wanted to get into a good role. And despite how amazingly talented Missy was at this period of time, she didn't. I mean, it's kind of a way to waste Missy Hyatt, making her just a babyface manager holding a dog on a leash. And Nancy got that prime role, eventually ending up with Ric Flair. Was there a lot of, at that time, heat in the air between Kevin Sullivan and Eddie Gilbert?
Well, see, now here also remember that we were gone from the first part of April until the first part of June. So I was just back, June and the rest of July until Flair started making changes. But obviously I talked to both guys. I never, and I've talked to Kevin a bunch. I mean, I was a lot closer to Kevin throughout history than I was to Eddie. He never knocked Eddie or had anything but respect for Eddie and what Eddie had done, either booking or working. Eddie never said anything to me publicly. I can't say that he didn't say anything privately, but I didn't ask him that deeply. They wanted Missy for what? Once again, Jim Hurd. I think they wanted Missy to be a baby face because she was doing the 800 number thing, which was still a deal at that point, and she was supposed to be doing interview segments or whatever. They were just trying to find a place to put her because unless you let Missy be Missy, it wasn't Missy. But they weren't letting Missy be Missy because the same reason Hurd didn't want me to be a manager at all. He wanted me to quit managing and become an announcer, and they could pay me more money. He was so fucking stupid. He was paying the announcers more money than the wrestlers, which was an idiocy. But that's where he was. I can pay you more money because you're an announcer and you do this, but not just a manager. So everybody was in a bad place in one way or another. To answer your question, I didn't see any obvious tension. Who knows? But and also at the time, Nancy she was so sweet. She didn't give a shit. She's like, just let me know what to do and she'll do it to the best of her ability and have fun.